In the suffocating heat of a morning, a young woman new to her job sees a hurt man on the sidewalk and disobeys strict orders to help him. She has no idea that this single act will rip her from her routine, put her face to face with dangerous secrets, and test with every step the limits of her courage. Part 1. On a humid March morning, as the bells of St. Peter's Church chimed across the historic buildings of uptown Charlotte, and the aroma of fresh donuts drifted from a nearby kitchen, 24-year-old Jessica Miller was rushing to the Harrison family's estate in Myers Park, her white apron already spotted with small drops of coffee she had spilled on the bus. She was new to the job, barely 3 weeks as a housekeeper, and she had a heart that couldn't ignore the suffering of others. Her green eyes shone with a mix of determination and tenderness, a contrast to her fair skin that flushed easily under the Carolina sun. Her light brown hair, always pulled back in a simple braid, framed soft features that reflected the kindness she had inherited from her grandmother. That Tuesday, as she crossed Providence Road with a bag of groceries for the mansion, she saw a man sprawled on the sidewalk, his face smudged with dirt, his arm bleeding, and a lost look that mixed hunger and pain. The man was about 30, though the dirt and grime made it difficult to tell for sure. Jessica dropped the groceries and ran to him, ignoring the severe voice of Mrs. Davis, the head housekeeper, who was yelling from the mansion window, "Jessica, get back here immediately, that's not our business." Jessica knew she was breaking the rules, but she couldn't stand the thought of leaving the man there under the relentless Charlotte sun. What she didn't know was that behind that unkempt beard and torn clothes was 32-year-old Alexander Harrison, heir to a hospital empire, who was, that day, disguised and testing the humanity of the people around him. "Sir, are you okay? Can I help you?" Jessica asked in a soft but firm voice, kneeling beside the stranger without a second thought for her uniform getting stained on the pavement. Her green eyes filled with compassion as she saw the superficial cuts on the man's arms. From his position on the ground, Alexander watched through narrowed eyelids as this young woman risked her job for a stranger. His blue eyes, normally cold and calculating in business meetings, were filled with genuine surprise. For years he had been surrounded by people who only approached him for his money and position, and here was this young woman, offering selfless help to someone she believed was homeless. I'm thirsty," Alexander murmured in a raspy voice, feigning weakness. Without hesitation, Jessica pulled a bottle of water from her personal bag and held it to the stranger's lips, gently supporting his head. "Drink slowly, sir. Have you eaten anything today?" The question resonated in Alexander's heart with an unexpected force. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had genuinely worried about him as a person, not as the CEO of Harrison Medical Centers. "No, I don't have money for food," he lied, watching as Jessica's eyes filled with fierce determination. "Wait here, don't move," she told him, and before Alexander could respond, she was already running towards a nearby deli. She returned 5 minutes later with a BBQ pulled pork sandwich and a soda, which she paid for with her own money she probably needed for her personal expenses. "Jessica Miller!" Mrs. Davis's shout cut through the air like a knife. The head housekeeper was approaching with a firm stride, her face red with fury. "Do you mind telling me what you're doing, wasting your time with these people?" Jessica stood up, but she didn't move away from the injured man. "Mrs. Davis, I'm just helping someone who needs it. I finished the groceries and I thought—" "You're not here to think," Mrs. Davis interrupted with a sneer. "You're here to follow orders, and my orders were clear. Buy the list and return immediately." Alexander, still on the ground, felt a growing rage at the humiliation he was witnessing. This young woman with a noble heart was being scolded for doing the right thing. "Please, don't scold her because of me," Alexander intervened in a weak voice. "She was just being kind." "You stay out of this," Carmen snapped at the supposed homeless man. "We have enough problems with housekeepers who don't know their place." Jessica felt her cheeks burn, not with shame, but with indignation. "My place is to help those in need, Mrs. Davis. My grandmother taught me that humanity doesn't care about social classes." "Your grandmother doesn't pay your salary." Mrs. Davis grabbed Jessica's arm. "Pick up those groceries and let's go." "And you," she said, turning to Alexander, "find help somewhere else." For the rest of the afternoon, Jessica worked in silence, but her mind couldn't forget the eyes of the man on the street. There was something in his gaze that didn't fit his appearance, a depth, an intelligence that contrasted with his situation. She wondered if he had gotten more food, if he had somewhere to spend the night. That same afternoon, Jessica was called to the mansion's study. Without giving her a chance to explain, Mrs. Davis humiliated her in front of all the other employees, accusing her of abandoning her duties and of risking the good reputation of the family. "We don't need cheap heroines here," Mrs. Davis said with contempt, as the other employees lowered their gazes, uncomfortable but not daring to intervene. "People like you need to understand there are limits. Your job is to clean, cook, and obey, not to be the savior of bums." Jessica felt as if she had been slapped. Mrs. Davis's words were cruel, but what hurt the most was the injustice. Was it really so wrong to help someone in need? Was her compassion truly such a serious flaw? "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Davis. It won't happen again," she murmured, holding back tears. "No, it won't happen again because you're fired. Get your things and leave. Your last paycheck will be sent to you after we've deducted the cost of the groceries you abandoned." The words fell on Jessica like stones. Fired. For helping someone, for being human. With the dignity she had left, Jessica lifted her head. "I understand. I'll get my things." As she went upstairs to collect her few belongings from the maid's room, the tears finally began to roll down her cheeks. They weren't tears of sadness alone, but of frustration and incomprehension. She came from a humble family in a working-class neighborhood, Elmwood Heights, where her mother, Mary Ellen, had taught her that helping your neighbor was a sacred duty. Her father, Joseph, had died when she was 15, leaving the family in a precarious financial situation, but they had never lacked love or solid values. Jessica remembered her grandmother Grace's words before she died. "Honey, in this world there will be people who tell you that you're worthless because you don't have money or an education, but your heart is worth more than all their dollars put together. Never let them convince you that doing good is wrong." That night, in the small rented room she had near the local market, Jessica looked at herself in the mirror. Her green eyes, usually bright, looked dull. Her fair skin showed the marks of her crying, and her hair, free from the braid, fell over her shoulders like a golden waterfall. "Was I wrong, Grandma?" she whispered to the air, as if her grandmother could hear her. "Should I have let that man suffer alone just to keep my job?" But in her heart she knew the answer. She had done the right thing, even if it cost her dearly. Her mother had always told her, "Patty, being poor doesn't mean being heartless. And having money doesn't give you the right to trample on others." The next morning, Jessica woke up with swollen eyes, but with renewed determination. She didn't have a job, but she had hands that could work, and a heart that hadn't been broken. She took her savings, barely a few $100s, and decided she would set up a small stand selling hot beef sandwiches in Independence Park. If she couldn't work for others, she would work for herself. As she prepared her first batch of cheesy meatloaf sandwiches with mashed potatoes, Jessica had no idea that her life was about to take a completely unexpected turn. A few blocks away, in the corporate offices of Harrison Medical Centers, Alexander was removing the last trace of the makeup he had used for his social experiment, but he couldn't get the image of a young woman with green eyes who had risked everything for a stranger out of his mind. What secrets did that seemingly casual encounter hold, and what would happen when the paths of Jessica and Alexander crossed again, but this time without disguises or lies? Part 2. 3 days after being fired, Jessica had managed to establish a precarious but hopeful routine. Every morning at 5 a.m., she would wake up in her small apartment to prepare the buns and fillings for the day. The aroma of melted cheddar and freshly cooked meat had become her new companion, replacing the smell of cleaning products from the Harrison mansion. Her stand in Independence Park, modest but clean, consisted of a folding table covered with a red and white checkered plastic tablecloth, a small grill connected to a nearby newspaper stand, thanks to the generosity of a 60-year-old man named Mr. Jones, who had been selling papers for 30 years, and a cooler where she kept her sodas. Jessica had invested almost all of her savings in the ingredients and basic equipment, but her determination was unbreakable. "Good morning, young lady. What do you recommend today?" The deep, familiar voice made Jessica look up from the grill, where she was toasting a sandwich bun. In front of her was the man she had helped 3 days earlier, but completely transformed. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal grey suit, an immaculate white shirt, and a navy blue tie that matched his eyes. His hair, now clean and combed back, revealed aristocratic features and a strong jawline. The scruffy beard had been replaced by an impeccable shave that accentuated his high cheekbones. He was undeniably handsome, with that confidence that only money and education can give, but it took Jessica a few seconds to recognize him. "You're the man from the other day?" she asked, dropping the spatula onto the grill, surprised by the transformation. Alexander smiled, and for the first time in years it wasn't a calculated smile for a business meeting or a magazine photo, but a genuine one. "It's me. I look a little different when I'm clean, don't I?" Jessica felt the heat rise to her cheeks. This man wasn't homeless. His demeanor, his way of speaking, even the way he stood, revealed an education and a social position that she hadn't perceived before. She felt confused and a little deceived. I don't understand," she stammered, nervously wiping her hands on her apron. "Why were you dressed as a bum?" Alexander finished her question with an expression that mixed amusement and something like shame. "It's a long story. Can I buy you a coffee when you're done with your shift? I'd like to explain and above all thank you properly for what you did." Jessica looked at him with suspicion. All her life, she had learned to be cautious with rich men. Her cousin Lisa had told her stories of friends who had been deceived by playboys who used them for fun and then abandoned them. But there was something in this man's blue eyes that seemed sincere. "I can't close early," she finally replied. "I need to sell everything I've prepared." Without a word, Alexander took out his wallet and placed several bills on the table. "I'll buy all your sandwiches, and the sodas too." Jessica looked at the money with wide eyes. It was more cash than she had seen together in a long time. "That's too much money, sir. I can't accept it." "It's not charity," Alexander said firmly. "It's a purchase. And considering you spent your own money to feed me the other day, I think it's fair." The logic was irrefutable, but Jessica still felt uncomfortable. "What are you going to do with all those sandwiches?" "I'm going to give them to the people who work at my office. Believe me, after years of eating in expensive restaurants, a sandwich made with love is exactly what they need." The word love resonated strangely in the air between them. Jessica blushed even more and began to pack the sandwiches into plastic containers. While she worked, Alexander discreetly watched her. Her movements were efficient but careful, treating each sandwich as if it were important. Her hands, though small, worked with a skill that spoke of years of cooking out of necessity, not as a hobby. When she bent down to get something out of the cooler, a strand of her brown hair escaped her braid and brushed against her cheek, and Alexander felt a strange need to brush it away with his own fingers. "Ready," Jessica announced, putting the last sandwich in a bag. "That's 40 sandwiches and 20 sodas." Alexander took the bags with one hand and extended the other to her. "Alexander Harrison." Jessica hesitated for a moment before taking his hand. It was soft but firm, very different from the calloused hands of the men she knew. Jessica Miller. It's a beautiful name, like its owner. The compliment took her by surprise and made her instinctively recoil. "Mr. Harrison, just Alexander, please. And don't be scared, I'm not one of those guys who goes around saying things to women. But you're special." Jessica began to collect her things with nervous movements. "I don't know why you say that. You don't know me. I know enough. I know you're the kind of person who risks her job to help a stranger. I know you have principles and a noble heart. That's more than I can say for most of the people I know." As they walked towards a small coffee shop near the church, Jessica couldn't help but feel self-conscious. People were looking at them, and she knew they made a strange couple. Him in his expensive suit and her in her simple cotton dress and worn-out shoes. "Are you uncomfortable?" Alexander asked, noticing her tension. "I'm not used to this," Jessica admitted, "to walking with someone like you, someone like me, rich, important, educated." The words came out more bitterly than she had intended. Alexander stopped on the sidewalk and turned to face her. "Jessica, can I tell you something? All my life I've been surrounded by rich, important, and educated people, and most of them wouldn't have lifted a finger to help someone who looked like I did the other day. You showed me that there's something far more valuable than money or education: humanity." They sat at a table at the Corner Cafe, a small and cozy place that had been a meeting point for Charlotte's intellectuals for decades. Jessica ordered a spiced coffee, and Alexander followed suit, even though he usually drank Italian espresso in his office. "Now what?" said Jessica, with more confidence after the first sip of her coffee. "Explain to me why you were disguised as a homeless man." Alexander sighed deeply, as if he was about to confess something that weighed on his soul. "Have you heard of Harrison Medical Centers?" Jessica nodded. "Of course. It's the biggest chain in the Carolinas. My family owns that chain, and for the past year I've been the CEO." Alexander paused, watching Jessica's eyes widen in surprise. "The problem is that I inherited a system that, while very profitable, had lost its soul. My hospitals had become money-making machines, where poor patients were treated like second-class citizens." Jessica listened attentively, noting the sincerity in his voice. "My mother died waiting in a public hospital emergency room when I was 18, Alexander continued, his voice slightly cracking. "She had suffered a heart attack, but because she didn't have private insurance, they made her wait. By the time they finally saw her, it was too late." "My God," Jessica murmured, instinctively reaching out to touch his hand. "I'm so sorry." The touch of her small, warm hand on his made Alexander feel a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. For years, I dedicated myself to studying and working to get into a position where I could change things. But when I finally had the power to do it, I realized that I had lost touch with reality. I didn't know what life was really like for the people I wanted to help. That's why you disguised yourself. Exactly. I wanted to see how ordinary people reacted to someone in need. Most ignored me or treated me with contempt. Some yelled at me to leave. Others gave me coins without even looking me in the eyes. Alexander looked at her directly. But you saw me as a person. You treated me with dignity. You gave me your own food. Jessica was overwhelmed by the story. And what do you plan to do with that information? Change the whole system. Create a program where private hospitals offer real free care to low-income people. Not just emergencies, but comprehensive care. And I want you to help me. Me? Jessica almost choked on her coffee. Sir, Alexander, I don't know anything about hospitals or administration. I barely finished high school. But you know what people need. You know the reality of living with few resources and many needs. That's worth more than any college degree. Jessica felt a mix of excitement and terror. It was an incredible opportunity, but she was also sure she wasn't qualified for such a responsibility. I don't know, she murmured. It's a lot. And besides, I don't understand why you'd want to help me after I lost my job because of helping you. Alexander felt a pang of guilt. Indirectly, he had been responsible for her losing her job. You lost your job because of me. Jessica told him what had happened with Mrs. Davis, from the public humiliation to the immediate firing. With every word, Alexander's expression hardened. That woman had no right to treat you like that, he said with a controlled fury that made Jessica feel strangely protected. It's the world we live in, she replied with resignation. People like me don't count for much. That's going to change, Alexander declared with a determination that sent a shiver down Jessica's spine. At least in my hospitals, it's going to change. Will you agree to work with me? Jessica looked into his eyes, those blue eyes that seemed to look directly into her soul. There was something about this man that scared her and attracted her at the same time. He was dangerous, not physically, but emotionally. He was the kind of man who could make her dream of things that were beyond her reach. Can I think about it? She finally asked. Of course, but while you're thinking, take this. Alexander took out a business card and wrote a number on the back. This is my personal number. Call me when you're ready to change the world. That night, Jessica stayed up late, tossing and turning in her small bed, looking at the card she had placed on her nightstand. Alexander Harrison, CEO, Harrison Medical Centers. The golden letters shone under the light of her lamp. What was happening? How had this man, who seemed to have stepped out of a soap opera, come into her life? And why? Every time she remembered his blue eyes and his sincere smile, did she feel butterflies in her stomach that had nothing to do with the job he had offered her? On the other side of town, in his penthouse, Alexander also couldn't sleep. He couldn't get the image of Jessica in her stained apron, risking everything to help a stranger, out of his mind, nor the way her green eyes lit up when she talked about her family, or how she had blushed when he had called her beautiful. For the first time in years, Alexander Harrison was thinking about something more than work and responsibilities. He was thinking about a young woman with green eyes who had restored his faith in humanity, and who, without knowing it, had begun to win his heart. But what complications would this mutual attraction bring between two people from such different worlds? And what secrets from their pasts could threaten any possibility of a future together? Part 3. A week later, Jessica finally gathered the courage to dial the number Alexander had written on his card. She had spent those days in a constant internal struggle between reason and her heart. Reason told her it was crazy to get involved with a man so far out of her social league. Her heart, on the other hand, whispered that maybe this was her chance to do something truly important with her life. Hello. Alexander's voice sounded warm and familiar through the phone. Alexander, it's Jessica. Jessica Miller. Her voice trembled slightly with nerves. Jessica. The relief in his voice was evident. I thought you had decided not to call. I've been thinking about your proposal, she said, nervously playing with the cord of the public phone she was calling from. And I accept. I want to help. The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long that Jessica thought the call had been disconnected. Alexander, I'm here. Just thank you. You don't know what this means to me. The genuine emotion in his voice made Jessica's heart race. Can you come to the offices tomorrow? I want to show you the project and introduce you to the team. The next day, Jessica stood in front of the impressive glass and steel building that housed the corporate headquarters of Harrison Medical Centers in uptown Charlotte. She had put on her best dress, a navy blue one that had belonged to her older sister, and had braided her hair with special care. Still, She felt completely out of place among the suited executives who were entering and leaving the building. "Miss Miller," a female voice pulled her out of her reverie. An elegant woman in her 40s, dressed in a grey pantsuit, approached her with a professional smile. "I'm Claudia Simmons, Mr. Harrison's assistant. He's expecting you." The elevator went up to the 20th floor in a silence that Jessica found overwhelming. The glass walls allowed her to see the city spreading out at her feet, and for a moment she felt dizzy, as much from the height as from the unreality of the situation. Alexander's office was impressive, spacious, bright, with a panoramic view of Charlotte, and decorated with exquisite taste that combined modern elements with pieces of American art. Alexander was standing by the window, dressed in a black suit that accentuated his athletic build. When he turned to greet her, Jessica felt the air escape from her lungs. "Jessica, it's good to see you." Alexander approached her with a smile that seemed to light up the whole room. "How are you?" "Nervous," she admitted honestly, which drew a genuine laugh from Alexander. "There's no reason to be. Everyone here is going to be your ally." Alexander guided her to an adjoining conference room where 3 people were waiting. "I want to introduce you to my team, Dr. Michael Sterling, the hospital chain's medical director, was a 55-year-old man with graying hair and a serious but kind expression. Ms. Jennifer Hayes, the director of social responsibility, not the Mrs. Davis from the mansion, fortunately, was a young woman of 30 with a warm smile and intelligent eyes. And Mr. David Jackson, a middle-aged man with glasses who radiated efficiency. "Jessica is going to lead our new free care program," Alexander announced. "She has a perspective that we need. She knows firsthand the needs of the people we want to serve." Jessica noticed the surprised looks exchanged among the team members. It was obvious that they didn't expect someone like her to be in a leadership position. "Excuse me," Dr. Sterling intervened delicately, "but what exactly is Miss Miller's experience in hospital administration?" The question, though asked without malice, made Jessica feel small. "I don't have formal experience," she admitted in a soft voice. "But I've lived my whole life on the patient's side. I know what it feels like to need medical care and not be able to afford it." "That's exactly what we need," Alexander said firmly. "We already handle the numbers and protocols well. What we lack is heart." For the next 2 hours, they discussed the details of the program. Jessica listened more than she spoke, feeling at times as if she were in a movie where she had taken the wrong part. But when they started talking about the human aspects of the project, she found her voice. "If I may make a suggestion," she said timidly, "I think we should start with a pilot program in a specific community, not just offering free consultations, but also education on prevention and basic health care." The proposal generated a lively debate, and Jessica was surprised to find herself defending her ideas with passion and practical knowledge. She talked about her Aunt Rose, who had died of diabetes because she didn't know how to manage her diet, and her neighbor Mr. Peterson, who had lost his sight because he didn't treat his hypertension in time. "Those stories are exactly what we need to document," Ms. Hayes said with enthusiasm. "They are real cases that can help us design more effective programs." When the meeting ended, Jessica felt exhausted but strangely energized. For the first time in her life, she had felt heard in a professional environment. "How did you feel?" Alexander asked as they walked back to his office. "Like an imposter," Jessica replied honestly, "but also excited. It's incredible to think that we can help so many people." Alexander stopped and turned to her. "Jessica, you are not an imposter. You are exactly what this project needs, and what I need." The intensity in his voice made Jessica look at him more carefully. There was something in his blue eyes that went beyond professionalism, something that made her feel warm and nervous at the same time. "Alexander, would you like to have dinner with me tonight?" The question came out of his mouth before he could think it through. To continue discussing the project, of course. Jessica felt herself blushing. "I don't know if that's appropriate. We're colleagues now and "You're right," Alexander said quickly, but he couldn't hide the disappointment in his voice. "That was inappropriate of me." Something in his expression made Jessica immediately regret her answer. Maybe a coffee would be okay. To talk about the project." The smile that lit up Alexander's face was like the sun coming out after a storm. "Perfect. I know a quiet place nearby." That afternoon, in a small coffee shop in the historic district, Jessica and Alexander talked for hours. Initially, they spoke about the hospital program, but gradually the conversation drifted to more personal topics. "Did you always want to work in hospitals?" Jessica asked. Alexander shook his head. "When I was a kid, I wanted to be an artist. I painted a lot, but after what happened with my mother, I decided I had to do something more useful." "Do you still paint?" "I haven't touched a brush in years." Alexander smiled sadly. What about you? What did you dream of being when you were a kid? Jessica was quiet for a moment. I wanted to be a teacher, but when my dad died, I had to start working to help my mum. Dreams become a luxury when you need to eat. The raw honesty of her response touched something deep in Alexander. Here was a woman who had sacrificed her own dreams to take care of her family, without complaining or seeking pity. "Is it ever too late to pick up a dream?" he asked softly. "Sometimes it is," Jessica replied, but there was a note of hope in her voice that hadn't been there before. When they finally said goodbye that night, both knew that something had changed between them. They were no longer just the executive and the employee, or even collaborators on a project. There was a personal connection growing. Despite the obvious obstacles, Jessica returned to her small room that night with her mind full of possibilities and her heart racing. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to think that maybe, just maybe, her dreams weren't as far out of reach as she had believed. Alexander, for his part, stayed up late in his penthouse, looking out at the city and thinking about a woman with green eyes who was changing not only his vision of work, but his vision of life itself. But neither of them knew that the real tests of their emerging relationship were about to begin, and that they would have to face not only the social differences that separated them, but also real enemies who would do everything possible to destroy both the program and any possibility of love between them. Part 4. 2 months after the pilot program began, Jessica had adapted to her new life in a way she herself would not have believed possible. Every morning she arrived at the Harrison Medical Center's offices at 8 o'clock sharp, dressed in the simple but elegant suits that Alexander had insisted on buying for her as part of the executive uniform. Although she had initially resisted, she had finally accepted when he explained that a professional image was important for the other executives to take her seriously. The Health for All program had started in the Elmwood Heights neighborhood, a low-income area in East Charlotte, where Jessica had grown up. The choice had not been a coincidence. She knew the specific needs of that community and had managed to build a trust that surprised even the most experienced doctors. "The results are extraordinary," Dr. Sterling told Alexander in one of their weekly meetings. "In just 2 months, we've treated more than 500 families, and the most impressive thing is that 90% of the patients have returned for their follow-up appointments. That had never happened in our previous programs." Jessica blushed every time she heard this praise, but deep down she knew her success was due to something very simple. She treated every patient as if they were a member of her own family. She remembered names, asked about the children, celebrated small improvements, and genuinely cared about the well-being of each person. However, not everything had been easy. From day one, Jessica had felt the resistance of some members of the medical team who questioned her authority. Dr. Anderson, head of surgery at the Central Hospital, had been particularly vocal in his objections. "With all due respect, Alexander," he had said in one particularly tense meeting, "this young woman doesn't have the necessary training to lead a program of this magnitude. It's a nice story of overcoming adversity, but hospitals are run with scientific, not sentimental criteria." The tension in the conference room had been palpable. Jessica had felt as if all eyes were judging her, weighing her credentials and finding them insufficient. But before she could defend herself, Alexander had responded with a firmness that bordered on coldness. "Dr. Anderson, the scientific criteria you mention resulted in a 70% treatment dropout rate in our previous social responsibility programs. Jessica has managed to reduce that figure to 10% in just 2 months. If that's not a scientific criterion for you, perhaps we need to review what you understand by science." The exchange had made it clear that Alexander backed her completely, but it had also created enemies within the organization. Jessica could feel the disapproving looks, hear the whispers in the hallways when they thought she wasn't listening. "They say she's only there because she's sleeping with the boss," Jennifer Hayes had confided to her during a lunch, trying to prepare her for the rumors that were circulating. "It's unfair and incorrect, but I wanted you to know so you'd be prepared." The revelation hit Jessica like a punch to the stomach. She knew her relationship with Alexander had evolved beyond the strictly professional, although they had both been careful to maintain clear boundaries at work. The occasional dinners, the long late-night phone conversations, and the stolen moments of emotional intimacy had created a bond that was undeniable, but which neither of them had officially defined. That afternoon, Jessica knocked on Alexander's office door with her heart pounding. He was reviewing financial reports, concentrated on the numbers dancing before his blue eyes. When he saw her come in, his expression immediately softened. "Jessica, what a pleasant surprise. How was the visit to the health center?" "Alexander, we need to talk." The seriousness in her voice made him put down the papers and give her his full attention. "What's wrong? You look worried." Jessica closed the door behind her and walked over to the desk, but she didn't sit down. People are talking about us. Alexander sighed deeply, as if he had been expecting this conversation. What are they saying? That I'm here because we have an intimate relationship, that I don't have the necessary qualifications, and that I'm just your mistress. The word came out with difficulty. Alexander's expression hardened, and Jessica could see the controlled fury stirring in his eyes. Who told you that? It doesn't matter who. What matters is that it's true, isn't it? In part, at least. Jessica hugged herself, as if she were cold. Would you have hired me if you hadn't been attracted to me as a woman? The question hung in the air between them like an accusation. Alexander got up from his chair and walked over to the window, turning his back to her. I don't know, he finally admitted, with an honesty that hurt more than any lie. Maybe initially the attraction influenced my decision, but the results speak for themselves, Jessica. You've done an extraordinary job, but that doesn't change the fact that my credibility is being questioned. Jessica felt tears threatening to well up, but she controlled them. And the worst part is that I'm starting to doubt myself. Am I really good at this? Or am I just pretending to be something I'm not? Alexander turned to her with a pained expression that surprised her. Jessica, how can you doubt yourself after everything you've accomplished? Because I don't know if I'm here because of my merits or because a rich man was attracted to me. The words came out more bitterly than she had intended. And the difference matters, Alexander. It matters a lot. The silence that followed was tense and charged with unexpressed emotions. Finally, Alexander approached her, stopping at a respectful distance, but close enough for her to see the sincerity in his eyes. You're right, he said softly. The difference matters, and you deserve to know the whole truth. Jessica felt her heart race. What truth? That yes, I initially hired you because you had impressed me as a person, and yes, that included an attraction to you that I couldn't deny. But Jessica, Alexander paused as if he were carefully choosing his words. In these 2 months, you've shown a leadership ability, an intuitive understanding of human needs, and a dedication that surpasses those of executives with decades of experience. The data doesn't lie. The program is a resounding success, and it's a success because you're leading it. But Jessica could feel a major revelation coming. But I also have to confess that what I feel for you has grown beyond any initial attraction, and that puts me in a complicated ethical position as your boss. The words hung in the air like a whispered confession in a confessional booth. Jessica felt like she couldn't breathe, not from surprise, but because she felt the exact same way. Alexander, let me finish, please. His voice was soft but determined. I've been thinking about this for weeks. I think we should separate our professional and personal relationships. I want you to continue leading the program, but reporting directly to the board of directors instead of to me. That way your success will be unquestionably yours. The proposal was generous and professional, but Jessica felt strangely hurt by it. And our personal relationship? That's up to you. Alexander looked at her with a vulnerability she had never seen before. Because I have to confess something else, Jessica. I've fallen in love with you. Completely, irrevocably in love. And I know that complicates everything. Jessica's heart stopped for a moment before starting to beat so hard she was sure he could hear it. Alexander, you don't have to answer now, he hurried to say. I just wanted you to know the truth, the whole truth. Jessica looked at him for a long time, seeing a sincerity in his blue eyes that completely disarmed her. Here was this powerful, successful man who could have any woman in the world confessing his love to her and offering her professional freedom at the same time. Do you know what the craziest thing about all this is? She finally said, a small smile playing on her lips. What? That I've fallen in love with you too. And that terrifies me more than any rumor or malicious comment. The mutual confession created a moment of such intense intimacy that they both felt as if the rest of the world had disappeared. Alexander took a step towards her, and Jessica didn't move away. Jessica, he murmured, raising a hand to gently caress her cheek. What are we going to do? I don't know, she whispered, closing her eyes at his touch. But I want to find out, with you. When their lips finally met, it was with the tenderness of two people who had been denying themselves this moment for months. It wasn't a passionate kiss, but a soft one, full of promises and hopes, a seal on a confession that had taken so much courage to express. But neither of them knew that at that moment, someone was watching them from the half-open office door. Dr. Anderson, who had come to deliver a report, had witnessed both the conversation and the kiss, and a cruel smile formed on his lips as he silently walked away. The following days brought a sense of hope and renewal for both Jessica and Alexander. They had decided to take things slowly, exploring their personal relationship while maintaining clear boundaries at work. Jessica began reporting directly to the board of directors, which initially filled her with nerves, but soon proved to be the right decision. However, their happiness was overshadowed when more specific and malicious rumors began to circulate. Someone had leaked information about private meetings, details of conversations that only someone with internal access could have known, and even unauthorized photos of Jessica and Alexander having lunch together. "This is orchestrated," Jennifer Hayes told her during an emergency meeting. "Someone is actively trying to sabotage both the program and your reputation." Jessica felt a mix of rage and powerlessness. She had worked so hard to prove her worth, and now she felt as if all her efforts were being reduced to office gossip. "Do you have any idea who it might be?" Alexander asked, his voice charged with controlled fury. "I have my suspicions," Jennifer replied, "but we need proof before we make any accusations." That night, Jessica returned to her apartment feeling emotionally and physically exhausted. She had decided to move to a better place with her first salary from Harrison Medical Centers, but it was still modest compared to the world she was now moving in. As she prepared a simple dinner, she reflected on the changes her life had undergone in just a few months. The doorbell took her out of her thoughts. When she opened it, she was surprised to find Alexander standing on her doorstep with an expression of concern that immediately put her on alert. "What happened?" she asked, inviting him in. "We have a problem," he said, entering and closing the door behind him. "Dr. Anderson has filed a formal complaint with the board of directors, accusing you of professional incompetence and accusing me of nepotism." Jessica felt as if she had been slapped. "Can he do that?" "He can, and he did. In addition, he has secured the support of 3 other members of the senior medical team." Alexander ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Jessica had learned to recognize as a sign of extreme stress. "They're going to convene a formal hearing next week." "What does that mean?" "It means they're going to review your performance, question your authority to lead the program, and potentially—" Alexander paused, as if the words physically pained him. "They could potentially recommend you for termination." Jessica sat down heavily on her small sofa, feeling as if the world was crumbling around her. "After everything we've accomplished." "Jessica, look at me." Alexander knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "I'm not going to let this happen. We're going to fight. We have the numbers on our side. We have patient testimonials. We have concrete results." "But they're also right about something," Jessica murmured, with tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I don't have the credentials I should have for this position. Maybe I should resign before this gets bigger." "No." The firmness in Alexander's voice surprised her. "You're not going to resign. You're not going to let a few insecure men destroy everything you've built." Jessica looked into his eyes, seeing a fierce determination in them that both reassured her and worried her at the same time. "What are you planning?" "We're going to present our case as convincingly as possible, and if necessary, I'm going to use my authority as CEO to protect the program and you." "Alexander, you can't risk your position for me." "Jessica," he raised a hand to caress her face, "my position is worthless if I can't use it to protect what's important. And you. You are the most important thing that has ever come into my life." The intensity of his words completely disarmed her. Here was this man, willing to risk everything he had built professionally for her. It was overwhelming and terrifying at the same time. "What if we lose?" she whispered. "Then we'll lose together." "But we're not going to lose, Jessica. We're not going to let it happen." That night, as they hugged on Jessica's small sofa, they both knew that the most difficult test of their relationship was approaching. Not only would they have to defend their work and their program, but also their right to be together despite social and professional differences. But what neither of them knew was that Dr. Anderson had an ace up his sleeve, a piece of information about Alexander's past that could change everything, and that the real battle was just beginning. Part 5. The Board of Directors hearing was scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m. in the main conference room on the 26th floor. Jessica had spent the entire week preparing, compiling statistics, patient testimonials, and evidence of the Health for All program's success. Jennifer Hayes had worked day and night helping her organize the presentation, while Alexander had made sure she had access to all the necessary resources, although he maintained a certain distance so as not to give his detractors more ammunition. That morning, Jessica dressed with special care, choosing a navy blue suit that gave her a professional but approachable look. She had put her hair up in a low bun, and she had practiced her presentation in front of the mirror until she could recite it by heart. Still, her hands were trembling slightly as she reviewed her notes one last time. "You're ready," Jennifer assured her as they went up in the elevator. You have all the numbers, all the proof. They're going to have to recognize your success. The board of directors was composed of 7 members, 5 men and 2 women, all successful business people and professionals with decades of experience. Jessica knew them by sight, but she had never interacted with them directly. The board's chairman, Mr. Roger Evans, a 65-year-old man with silver hair and an imposing presence, was leading the session. Miss Miller, Mr. Evans began in a neutral voice, we understand that there are certain concerns about your suitability to lead the social responsibility program of this institution. This hearing is intended to objectively evaluate your performance and determine the most appropriate course of action. Jessica nodded, trying to project more confidence than she felt. I understand perfectly, Mr. Evans. I appreciate the opportunity to present the results of the program. For the next 30 minutes, Jessica meticulously presented the program's achievements. The numbers were impressive. 500 families served, a 90% follow-up rate, a 30% reduction in emergency admissions in the pilot area, and moving testimonials from patients whose lives had been transformed. Mrs. Elizabeth Miller, 68, diabetic, Jessica read from one of her reports, had not seen a doctor in 5 years due to lack of resources. Thanks to the program, she is not only managing her diabetes, but has also learned to teach others in her community about prevention and basic health care. She alone has referred 22 new patients to the program. The board members exchanged glances, clearly impressed by the results. Jessica was beginning to feel a cautious hope when Mr. Evans announced that it was Dr. Anderson's turn to present his concerns. Dr. Anderson stood up with the confidence of someone who knew they had winning cards they hadn't yet shown. He was a tall, thin man in his 50s, with dark, slicked-back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Gentlemen of the board, he began in a grave voice, no one here questions that the program has shown some positive results. However, we must consider whether these results justify the fundamental irregularity of having someone without appropriate credentials in a position of such responsibility. Jessica felt her stomach tighten. She knew this criticism would come, but she had hoped the results would speak for themselves. More importantly, Dr. Anderson continued, we must consider whether this situation is truly a case of professional merit or whether we are witnessing a more personal form of favoritism. The atmosphere in the room immediately became tense. Jessica felt her cheeks burn, and she could see how Alexander, sitting at the back of the room as an observer, visibly tensed. Dr. Anderson, Mr. Evans intervened with a warning tone, I hope you have concrete evidence for any insinuation you are making. Of course. Dr. Anderson smiled with an expression that sent a shiver of premonition down Jessica's spine. But before we get to that, I believe there is some information about our CEO that the board should know. Information that sheds a very different light on this situation. Alexander stood up abruptly. What are you talking about, Anderson? Sit down, Mr. Harrison, Mr. Evans ordered. Dr. Anderson, proceed, but I warn you to be very careful with your words. Dr. Anderson opened a folder he had kept closed until that moment. 6 years ago, Alexander Harrison was involved in a scandal that resulted in the death of a patient at St. Raphael's Hospital in New York City. The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica felt as if the air had been sucked from her lungs. She looked at Alexander and saw that his face had turned completely pale. Alexander Harrison was the administrative director of the hospital at that time. Dr. Anderson continued, clearly enjoying the impact of his revelation. A low-income patient, Anna Lee Miller, 26 years old, a mother of 2 small children, died after being denied emergency care for lack of adequate health insurance. Jessica felt the world sway around her. She looked at Alexander, searching in his eyes for a denial, an explanation, anything to make this nightmare not real. The case was covered up, Dr. Anderson went on, but I have copies here of the internal reports, staff testimonies, and documentation showing that Mr. Harrison personally signed the order to transfer the patient to a public hospital, despite knowing that the transfer would take too long. That's not true. Alexander stood up, his voice broken with emotion. The situation was much more complex. So you don't deny that you signed the transfer order? Dr. Anderson pressed. Alexander fell silent, and in that silence, Jessica found her answer. He had signed it. Everything he had told her about wanting to change the system, about losing his mother in a public hospital, about dedicating his life to doing things differently, had it all been a lie? Mr. Harrison, Mr. Evans said in a severe voice, is this accusation true? Alexander looked around the room, his eyes finally stopping on Jessica. She could see a mixture of pain, guilt, and despair in his gaze that completely disarmed her. It's complicated, he finally murmured. It's not complicated, Dr. Anderson exploded. "A woman died because you followed protocols that prioritized costs over human lives. And now, 6 years later, you want us to believe you've changed, that you really care about helping the poor. Isn't it convenient that this change of heart coincides exactly with your interest in Miss Miller?" The connection Dr. Anderson was making was devastating. He was suggesting that the entire program, all of Alexander's interest in helping the needy, had been an elaborate farce to impress Jessica. Jessica slowly stood up, feeling as if she were moving in a dream. All the pieces were fitting together in a horrible way. The homeless disguise, the story about his mother, the free health program. Had it all been an elaborate manipulation? "Jessica," Alexander's voice sounded desperate, "let me explain." But she couldn't listen to him anymore. The voices in the room became a distant murmur as Dr. Anderson's words echoed in her head. A woman had died. A woman her age, with small children, had died because Alexander had put bureaucratic rules above human life. "Miss Miller," Mr. Evans' voice brought her back to the present. "Were you aware of this information about Mr. Harrison?" Jessica looked at the chairman of the board, then at Alexander, whose blue eyes silently pleaded for her to give him a chance to explain. But at that moment, all she could see was the image of a woman dying while Alexander signed papers in an office. "No," she replied in a voice barely audible, "I didn't know anything about this." "I understand," Mr. Evans continued, "that this revelation must be unsettling. Given the circumstances, I believe we need a recess to evaluate all this information." Jessica nodded mechanically, but her legs seemed unwilling to support her. Jennifer quickly came to support her, while Alexander tried to approach her from the other side of the room. "Jessica, please," he shouted, "let me explain what really happened." But she had already left the room, almost running towards the elevator. She couldn't be in the same space as him right now. She couldn't look into those blue eyes she had learned to love without seeing the image of Anna Lee Miller dying because he had followed the rules. The elevator went down slowly towards the lobby, and with each floor that passed, Jessica felt as if her heart was breaking a little more. She had trusted him completely. She had fallen in love not only with him, but with his vision, his passion for helping others, the story he had told her about wanting to honor his mother's memory. Had it all been a lie? Or was there more to the story that Dr. Anderson hadn't told? When she got to the lobby, Jessica automatically headed for the exit, but a voice stopped her. "Jessica, wait!" It was Jennifer, who had run down the stairs to catch up with her. "Jennifer, I can't think right now," Jessica murmured, with tears beginning to roll down her cheeks. "I understand you're confused and hurt," Jennifer said, panting from the run, "but there's something you need to know before you make any decisions." Jessica stopped, turning to face her friend and ally. "What?" "I've been investigating Dr. Anderson since the rumors about you started, and I've discovered something important." Jennifer lowered her voice, looking around to make sure no one else could hear. "Dr. Anderson isn't doing this just for professional principles. He has a very specific personal motivation." "What do you mean?" "Anna Lee Miller, the woman who died 6 years ago. She was his daughter." The words hit Jessica like a thunderbolt. "His daughter?" "Adoptive," Jennifer clarified. "He had informally adopted her when she was a teenager, after her parents died. For him, she wasn't just a patient who died due to administrative negligence. She was his family." The revelation added a new dimension to the whole situation. Dr. Anderson wasn't just trying to sabotage Alexander for professional reasons. He was seeking revenge for the death of someone he considered his daughter. "But that doesn't change the fact that she died," Jessica murmured, "and that Alexander signed the order that contributed to her death." "No," Jennifer agreed, "but it means that maybe we don't have the whole story. Dr. Anderson has been planning this for years, Jessica. He's been waiting for the perfect opportunity to destroy Alexander, and your relationship with him gave him exactly the ammunition he needed." Jessica felt overwhelmed by all the information. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Jennifer." "Then give him a chance to explain," Jennifer pleaded. "Before you throw away everything you've built together, listen to his side of the story." But Jessica wasn't sure anymore if she wanted to hear that version. How could she trust the words of someone who had hidden something so important? And how could she be sure that any explanation he gave wouldn't be another carefully constructed manipulation? That afternoon, Jessica returned to her apartment feeling as if she had aged years in a single day. She sat on her small sofa, the same one where Alexander had comforted her just a few days before, and tried to process everything she had discovered. Her phone rang repeatedly with calls from Alexander, but she couldn't face that conversation yet. She needed time to think, to understand what was real and what had been a carefully constructed illusion. As the sun set over Charlotte, Painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that she would normally find beautiful, Jessica faced the most difficult question of her life. Could she forgive someone for a past mistake that had cost a life? And could she trust that the man she had fallen in love with was real and not just a carefully constructed facade to manipulate her feelings? The answers to those questions would determine not only the future of her relationship with Alexander, but also the fate of the program that had come to mean so much to her and the hundreds of families who depended on it. Part 6. For 3 days, Jessica didn't answer Alexander's calls. She had needed that time to process not only the revelation about Anna Lee Miller, but also to examine her own feelings and decide what the right thing to do was. Jennifer had respected her need for space, but had sent her a crucial message. The board of directors had postponed its decision on the program until the situation with Alexander was resolved. On the 4th day, a rainy Wednesday that perfectly reflected the somber mood that had dominated Jessica, she finally decided that she needed to hear the full version of the story. Not because she was necessarily going to forgive Alexander, but because she deserved to know the truth before making a final decision about her future. She called Alexander that afternoon, and his voice when he answered the phone revealed the emotional exhaustion he had been experiencing. "Jessica," he murmured, as if he didn't dare to believe it was really her. "I want to talk," she said without preamble, "but not in your office, or in my apartment, in a neutral place." They met at Freedom Park, a place where they had walked together several times during the first weeks of their relationship. It was fitting, Jessica thought, to meet there for what could be their final conversation. Alexander arrived first, and when Jessica saw him sitting on a bench under a large oak tree, she was surprised by how much he had changed. He had deep circles under his eyes. His clothes, although impeccable as always, seemed to hang slightly on his frame, as if he had lost weight. When he saw her approach, he stood up with an expression of hope mixed with terror. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. Jessica sat on the opposite end of the bench, maintaining a physical distance that reflected the emotional distance she had built between them. "I want you to tell me the whole story from the beginning, and I want the complete truth, Alexander. I can't handle half-truths or secrets anymore." Alexander nodded, breathing deeply as if he were preparing to confess before a court. "The story begins 7 years ago. Not 6, as Anderson said. I had recently finished my master's in hospital administration and had accepted the position of administrative director at St. Raphael's Hospital. I was young, ambitious, and I was convinced that I could change the system from within." Jessica listened without interrupting, watching every detail of his expression for any sign of a lie. St. Raphael's Hospital was a prestigious private institution, but it had a social responsibility program that served low-income patients, Alexander continued. However, that program was poorly managed, with limited funds and bureaucratic protocols that often delayed care. I knew there were problems, but I thought I could solve them gradually by working within the system. "And Anna Lee?" Jessica asked softly. Alexander closed his eyes for a moment, as if the mention of the name caused him physical pain. Anna Lee Miller arrived at the hospital one night in December. She had suffered a minor car accident, but had developed internal complications that were not immediately detected. When they finally realized the seriousness of her condition, she no longer had enough private health insurance to cover the surgery she needed. "And you signed her transfer," Jessica stated without accusation in her voice, just stating a fact. "Yes," Alexander admitted, his voice cracking, "but not for the reasons that Anderson suggested. Jessica, I fought for her. For 3 hours, I was in emergency meetings, trying to find a way for the hospital to cover the costs. I talked to the medical director, to the board of directors. I even offered to pay the expenses out of my own pocket." Jessica looked at him in surprise. This was not what she had expected to hear. "But the board was inflexible," Alexander continued, with tears beginning to form in his eyes. "They said that setting a precedent for free care for complex cases would open the doors to lawsuits that could bankrupt the hospital, and technically they were right from a financial point of view. So why did you sign the transfer?" "Because the alternative was for her to die in our waiting room without receiving any care. At least at the public hospital she had a chance, however small." Alexander covered his face with his hands. "I thought I was making the least bad decision of the terrible options I had." Jessica felt something move in her chest, a painful understanding of the impossible position Alexander had found himself in. "What happened next?" "Anna Lee died during the transfer. She never made it to the public hospital." The words came out as a choked murmur. "And I was shattered, not just by the loss of a life, but by the understanding that the system I had dedicated my career to was fundamentally corrupt. "Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning?" Jessica asked, feeling her defenses begin to crumble. "Because I was scared," Alexander admitted, looking up to meet her eyes directly. "Scared that you would see me the way Dr. Anderson sees me, as a bureaucratic murderer. Scared that you wouldn't be able to understand that sometimes good people are forced to make terrible decisions." Jessica remained silent for a long time, watching the raindrops that were beginning to fall on the park's lake. Finally, she spoke. "Do you know what hurts me the most about all this, Alexander?" He looked at her with fearful anticipation. "It's not that you made a mistake years ago. It's that you didn't trust me enough to tell me about it from the beginning." Tears finally began to roll down Jessica's cheeks. "I fell in love with you believing that we knew each other completely, and now I discover that there was a huge part of your life, of who you are, that you hid from me." "You're right," Alexander admitted, "and I have no excuse for that. I can only tell you that I was so afraid of losing you that I made the exact decisions that ensured I would." The painful irony of the situation was not lost on either of them. Alexander's attempt to protect their relationship by hiding his past had ended up destroying it. "What are you going to do now?" Jessica asked. "I'm going to face the consequences of my actions," Alexander replied with determination. "Tomorrow, I'm going to appear before the board of directors and I'm going to tell them the whole story just as I told you. I'm going to accept any decision they make about my future at the company. And the program? The program is yours, Jessica. You built it, you led it, you made it successful. No matter what happens to me, you're going to fight to keep it alive." Jessica felt a new wave of emotion. Even in this moment, when his own professional future was in jeopardy, Alexander was thinking about protecting the work she had built. "Alexander," she murmured, "I need time to process all this, to decide what I really feel, to understand if we can rebuild the trust that was broken." "I understand," he replied, although the pain in his voice was evident. "Is there any chance that we can try?" Jessica looked at him for a long time, seeing in his blue eyes the man she had fallen in love with, but also the man who had hidden important secrets from her. "I don't know, honestly, I don't know." That night, Jessica returned to her apartment with more questions than answers. She had hoped the conversation with Alexander would give her clarity, but instead she felt more confused than ever. She could understand his actions. She could even empathize with the impossible position he had found himself in, but could she forgive the lack of trust? Could she rebuild a relationship based on secrets? The next day, the entire Harrison Medical Center's building was buzzing with rumors and speculation. Alexander's hearing before the board of directors was scheduled for 2 p.m., and Jessica knew that the results of that meeting would determine not only Alexander's future, but also the fate of the Health for All program. Jennifer found her in her office that morning with a worried expression. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm living in a nightmare," Jessica admitted. "Have you heard anything from the board?" "Only that they're divided. Some want to fire Alexander immediately. Others think he should have a chance to explain himself." As they spoke, an unexpected call came in. It was Dr. Anderson asking to speak to Jessica privately. Against her better judgment, Jessica agreed to see him in her office. Dr. Anderson entered with an expression that mixed satisfaction and something that might have been remorse. "Miss Miller, I imagine this has been difficult for you. What do you want, Dr. Anderson?" Jessica had no patience for diplomacy. "I want you to know that I have nothing personal against you," he said, sitting down uninvited. "In fact, I respect the work you've done, but I needed you to understand who the man you fell in love with really is. And who is he, according to you?" "A man who values rules and protocols more than human lives," Dr. Anderson replied with bitterness. "A man who can rationalize any decision, regardless of the human consequences." Jessica looked at him directly. "Or is he a man who was trapped in a corrupt system and made the only decision that was available to him?" Dr. Anderson's expression hardened. "My daughter died because of that decision, and I am deeply sorry for that loss," Jessica replied with sincerity. "But destroying Alexander isn't going to bring Anna Lee back, and destroying the program that is helping hundreds of families isn't going to honor her memory." "So you're going to defend him?" Dr. Anderson asked in surprise. Jessica was quiet for a moment, realizing that her instinctive response had revealed something about her own feelings that she hadn't even admitted to herself. "I'm going to defend what's right," she finally said. That afternoon, Jessica found herself walking towards the conference room on the 26th floor, even though she had not been officially summoned to the hearing. She knew Alexander was inside, facing the board's questions and accusations, and although she was still hurt and confused, she couldn't bear the idea of him facing this crisis completely alone. When she arrived on the 26th floor, she found Jennifer waiting in the reception area. "What are you doing here?" her friend asked. "I couldn't stay in my office doing nothing," Jessica admitted. "Do you know how the meeting is going? It's been going on for 2 hours, and 20 minutes ago, Dr. Anderson went in with more documents." Jessica felt her stomach tighten. "More evidence? I don't know, but—" Jennifer hesitated. "Jessica, there's something else I discovered. Something that changes everything." "What?" Jennifer took a folder from her bag. "I've been investigating the Anna Lee case more deeply, and I found this in the files of the public hospital where she died." Jessica opened the folder and began to read the medical report. At first the technical words confused her, but she gradually began to understand what she was seeing. "Jennifer," she murmured, "this says that Anna Lee was already in an irreversible critical state when she arrived at St. Raphael's Hospital, that even if she had received the surgery immediately, the chances of survival were less than 10%. Exactly. Dr. Anderson has been blaming Alexander for a death that was likely inevitable no matter what decisions had been made." Jessica felt a mix of relief and fury. Relief because this meant that Alexander hadn't been responsible for Anna Lee's death in the way she had believed. Fury because Dr. Anderson had known this and had used his adoptive daughter's death for an unjustified personal revenge. "We need to show this to the board," Jessica said, standing up. "Are you sure? Once you go in there, there's no turning back. You'll officially be on Alexander's side." Jessica looked toward the conference room door, knowing that on the other side was the man who had hurt her with his secrets, but who had also changed her life in ways she never could have imagined. The man who had made mistakes, but who had dedicated years of his life to trying to atone for them. "Yes," she said with a determination that surprised her. "I'm sure." When Jessica opened the conference room doors, all conversations stopped. Alexander looked at her with surprise and something that seemed like hope, while Dr. Anderson looked alarmed by her appearance. "I apologize for the interruption," Jessica said in a clear and strong voice, "but there is crucial information about the Anna Lee Miller case that the board needs to know before making any decision." Mr. Evans looked at her with curiosity. "Miss Miller, this is a closed hearing." "I understand, but this information fundamentally changes the nature of the accusations against Alexander Harrison." Jessica walked to the board table and placed the folder in front of Mr. Evans. "This is the complete medical report from the public hospital where Anna Lee was transferred, a report that shows her condition was terminal before she arrived at St. Raphael's Hospital." Dr. Anderson stood up abruptly. "That changes nothing. He still made the decision to transfer her. He made the decision to give her the only chance she had," Jessica replied, turning to face him. "And you knew it. You knew your daughter was going to die no matter what, but you decided to use her death to destroy an innocent man." Jessica's words resonated in the tense silence of the room. Alexander looked at her with an expression of gratitude and love so intense that she felt her heart skip a beat. Mr. Evans quickly reviewed the documents, consulting with the other board members in whispered murmurs. Finally, he looked up. "Dr. Anderson, were you aware of this medical information when you presented your accusations?" Dr. Anderson remained silent, his pale face revealing the answer. "I see," Mr. Evans continued. "Given these new circumstances, and considering the extraordinary results of the Health for All program, the board has decided that there is no basis to remove Mr. Harrison from his position." Jessica felt a wave of relief so strong that she had to hold on to the back of a chair. "However," Mr. Evans added, "we have also decided that the Social Responsibility program needs a more independent oversight structure. Miss Miller, the board officially offers you the position of Director of Social Responsibility, reporting directly to us instead of to Mr. Harrison." The offer was exactly what Jessica had dreamed of from a professional point of view. Official recognition, independence, and the opportunity to expand the program she had come to love. But it also meant an official separation from Alexander in the workplace. "I accept," she replied without hesitation, "on the condition that the program maintains its focus on comprehensive care and that we have the necessary budget to expand into other communities." "Done," Mr. Evans smiled. When the meeting ended and the room emptied, Jessica and Alexander were left alone for the first time since their confrontation in the park. The tension between them was palpable, charged with unresolved emotions and unanswered questions. "Thank you," Alexander said finally. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Jessica replied, "because it was the right thing to do." "And us?" The question came out as a whisper. Jessica looked at him for a long time, seeing the complete man for the first time, his strengths and his weaknesses, his past mistakes and his efforts to atone for them, his ability to hurt and his ability to love. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I would like to try to find out, if you're willing to be completely honest with me. No more secrets." "No more secrets," Alexander promised, approaching her slowly. I love you, Jessica. I love you not despite who I am, but because you help me to be the best version of myself. I love you too, she replied, surprised by how easily the words came from her lips. But love isn't enough. We need trust, mutual respect, and the ability to face whatever comes our way together. Can we build that? He asked, extending his hand to her. Jessica looked at the outstretched hand, knowing that taking it meant committing to an uncertain path, but one full of possibilities. We can try, she finally said, intertwining her fingers with his. 6 months later, the inauguration ceremony for the second Health for All clinic took place in the Polanco neighborhood, another low-income area in Charlotte. Jessica, now officially recognized as the Director of Social Responsibility for Harrison Medical Centers, had worked tirelessly to expand the program. The results had exceeded all expectations. More than 1,500 families served, a network of community health promoters trained by the program itself, and a follow-up rate that had attracted the attention of international health organizations. Alexander was in the audience, watching with pride as Jessica gave her inaugural speech. Their relationship had been a gradual process of rebuilding trust, full of difficult conversations, moments of doubt, and small victories that had strengthened their bond. They had decided to take things slowly, building a solid foundation before making more permanent commitments. When I started this program a year ago, Jessica said into the microphone, I thought my job was simply to offer free medical care to those who needed it. But I've learned that true healing comes from treating every person with dignity, respect, and love. Anna Lee Miller, a young mother we lost years ago, taught us that every life has value and that our job as health professionals is to honor that truth every day. Dr. Anderson, who had remained at the hospital under strict supervision after his attempt at revenge, was present at the ceremony. He approached Jessica after the speech. Miss Miller, he said in a soft voice, I wanted to thank you for mentioning Anna Lee and to apologize. I let my pain turn into something ugly, and I almost destroyed something beautiful in the process. Jessica looked at him with compassion. Pain can make us do terrible things, Dr. Anderson, but it can also inspire us to do extraordinary things. Anna Lee would be proud to see how her memory is helping to save lives. That night, Jessica and Alexander walked together through the streets of uptown Charlotte, enjoying the cool breeze and the sound of a blues band playing in Independence Park. These evening strolls had become a tradition, stolen moments of intimacy away from the pressures of work and the expectations of the world. What are you thinking about? Alexander asked, noticing that Jessica had been quiet for several minutes. How strange life is, she replied, stopping next to the park's fountain. A year ago, I was a housekeeper selling sandwiches to survive. Now I run a program that's changing lives. I have a career I'm passionate about, and she looked at Alexander with a shy smile. I'm in love with a man I thought was completely out of my reach. I was never out of your reach, Alexander replied, taking her hands in his. You saved my soul, Jessica. You restored my faith in human kindness and gave me a purpose that goes beyond money or success. And now what? She asked. What's next for us? Alexander smiled, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Jessica's heart stopped as she recognized what it was. Now, he said, kneeling in the park where they had met as two strangers who helped each other, I'm asking you if you want to build the rest of our lives together. Not as boss and employee, not as rich and poor, but as two people who love each other and who want to make the world a better place. Tears streamed freely down Jessica's cheeks as she looked at the simple but beautiful ring that shone under the lights of the park. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I do. When Alexander put the ring on her finger, Jessica felt all the pieces of her life finally fall into place. It hadn't been an easy path, and she knew the future would bring new challenges. But she also knew that they had built something real and lasting, a relationship based on honesty, mutual respect, and a shared commitment to using their privilege to help others. 1 year later, Jessica and Alexander's wedding was held in an intimate ceremony in a local church in Elmwood Heights, Jessica's hometown. They had decided to honor her humble roots rather than organizing the extravagant celebration that their social position would have dictated. The guests included families from the Health for All program, work colleagues, and of course Jessica's family, who had come from different parts of the state to celebrate. During the exchange of vows, Jessica spoke about how Alexander had taught her that true love knows no social barriers and that people can change when they have powerful enough reasons to do so. Alexander spoke about how Jessica had shown him that true wealth is found in the ability to touch the lives of others in a positive way. After the ceremony, as they danced their first song as husband and wife to the sounds of a local band, Jessica reflected on the path that had led them there. It had started with a simple decision to help a stranger on the street, and it had resulted in a complete transformation of their lives. "Any regrets?" Alexander murmured as they swayed gently. "Just one," Jessica replied with a mischievous smile. "What's that?" "That it took me so long to realize that I deserved to be loved for who I am, not for what others thought I should be." "Well," Alexander said, leaning in to kiss her gently, "we have the rest of our lives to make up for lost time." And as the sun set over Charlotte, painting the sky in the same golden tones that had been present on the day they met, Jessica and Alexander realized that their love story was also a story of redemption, growth, and proof that sometimes the differences that seem to separate us can become the forces that unite us in the most profound way. The Health for All program continued to grow under Jessica's direction, expanding to 5 different states and serving as a model for similar programs across the country. Alexander became a vocal advocate for healthcare system reform, using his position and resources to lobby for policies that prioritized universal access to medical care. But more important than any professional success was the family they built together, a family based on shared values, unconditional love, and a commitment to using their blessings to bless others. And when their first daughter was born, 2 years after their wedding, they decided to name her Anna Lee, in honor of the woman whose death had inspired so much pain, but whose memory had catalyzed something beautiful. Jessica and Alexander's life showed that true love is not just an emotion, but a daily decision to choose compassion over judgment, unity over division, and hope over fear. And that sometimes the most beautiful stories are born from the most unexpected encounters between souls who are destined to change each other's lives forever. Epilogue. 10 years later, Dr. Jessica Harrison Miller, she had decided to keep both surnames as a symbol of pride in her origins, stood in front of a packed auditorium at the University of North Carolina, giving a lecture on leadership in public health. She had completed her bachelor's and master's degrees while running the program, proving that it's never too late to pursue your own dreams. True transformation, she told the medical students who were listening intently, doesn't come from changing external systems or structures. It comes from changing hearts. And that can only happen when we treat every person we meet as if they have the power to change our lives. Because in my experience, the people we least expect often turn out to be exactly what we need. In the audience, Alexander watched her with the same love and admiration he had felt since the first day he saw her risk everything to help a stranger. Beside him, their 2 daughters, Anna Lee, 8, and Mary Ellen, 5, listened proudly as their mother shared the story they had heard many times, but which never failed to inspire them. After the lecture, as the family walked through the university campus, Anna Lee took her mother's hand. "Mommy," she said with the seriousness only children can have, "when I grow up, I want to help people just like you." Jessica knelt to be at her daughter's level, seeing in her green eyes the same sparkle of compassion that her grandmother Grace had seen in hers so many years before. "My love," she told her, "you're already helping people. Every time you're kind to someone, every time you share what you have, every time you treat others with respect no matter who they are, you're changing the world." And as they walked home that afternoon, Jessica reflected on the simple but powerful truth that had guided her life, that love, compassion, and human dignity are the most transformative forces in the universe. That no matter where we come from or where we're going, we all have the power to touch the lives of others in ways that can change the course of history. Her story with Alexander had begun with a simple act of kindness on a street in Charlotte, but it had blossomed into something that touched the lives of thousands of people. And although she knew that life would still bring challenges and difficulties, she also knew that as long as they had love, purpose, and each other, they could face anything that came their way. Because in the end, she had learned that true wealth is not measured in money or social position, but in the ability to love and be loved, to serve and be valued, and to know that your life has made a positive difference in the world.